Every once in a while, a conversation takes on new meaning with the passage of time. When Markwayne Mullin sat down with us on 13th and Park, he was already known as a fighter, in business, in the MMA ring, and in the halls of Congress. Now, with President Trump selecting him to lead the Department of Homeland Security, that conversation feels more relevant than ever. So today, we revisit our interview with a man now stepping into one of the most demanding roles in Washington, protecting the homeland. From Ballard Studios' remote location in Tampa, Florida, it's time for 13th and Park.
I never dreamed going into the White House you'd risk your freedom.
We in Congress will act together when we have to act.
They deserve better, and we owe them some results.
I believe this country's best days continue to remain ahead. I had no idea the monster we unleashed.
I play every night, and people love it. They're going berserk.
Well, I don't have any Emmy Awards behind me yet, but,
I'm sure they're coming.
I'm so glad to be here on 13th and Park.
Well, Senator, it's great to have you on the show today. Obviously, you have your proverbial shirt sleeves rolled up and are hard at work, but you just confided to me that for 20 years, you did radio and you had a popular home improvement show that had a comedic element to it. Tell me about that.
Well, I was looking for a unique way to advertise my plumbing company of all things.
Oh, yeah.
And so I got invited to an info commercial on radio, and I thought, this is great. So I convinced a local station to give me some time on a Saturday morning. It pulled into the leading station, tried to pick me up Saturday morning. Then it pulled into Clear Channel, picking me up to do a syndicated regional show. And I'd bring in different home improvement. And what I'd tell people, I was like, listen, we are there to be the coolest table in the restaurant that everybody wants to join in. And so I'm going to make fun of you. We're going to talk about stupid things that we've done. We bring in the most ridiculous projects that homeowners that try to do themselves, and we just honestly had a blast. I hated walking away from it because by the time we quit, we were the number one show in our region, but I got into politics and it still goes, but I think they're about ready to shut it down because now a company owns it. So it's not the same though.
You've been a member of Congress for a number of terms. Now you're in the U.S. Senate. How do we make Congress more effective? How do we get them doing the job Americans sent them there to do more impactfully, maybe with less rancor or more results?
Well, I think it's the type of people you recruit. I had this deep conversation with myself after the 2016 election, really. I was like, if we're ever going to change Congress, we got to change the type of people we send here. It cannot be their best job. It can't be a career politician that was a county commissioner that turned into a state rep, that turned into a state senator that ran for Congress. You have to have a job that had identity before you got into politics. So you have something to go home to and you have something to feel passionate about. Because if politics is your career, then you're going to do whatever it takes to stay in politics. And so we went into recruiting real heavy. I mean, I got very involved in the NRCC in recruiting members of Congress, because when I first got elected, there's only 3 members of Congress that was still actively in business. It was Roger Williams, that has car dealerships, David Baldeo, who had 2 dairies at the time. He only has 1 now, and then myself. And so you think about that, that means everybody else, they were paying their bills off of Congress. And so can you make that tough decision? Because not all your constituents always knows everything that's happening. And so sometimes you have to make that decision, yes or no. Anybody can go in there and get the votes 50% of the time right. So it's really hard to get put out of office. But some of those votes are very, very difficult to make. And I think that's the only way you change it. You have to change the direction. People talk about, term limits. That's a whole nother thing. We can go down that and talk about term limits. But then you also empower the deep state when you do that, because the deep state isn't the members of Congress. The deep state is the bureaucrats and the staff that won't have term limits, and they will stay here way longer than you. And they know if you're in their way, all they got to do is wait you out. There are pros and cons go in both directions. But my point is the only way you change Congress is you've got to change the type of people we send here.
Well, you're very clearly a mission-directed individual. And there are all sorts of explanations for that make sense, right? You, at one point, were headed down the path of being a professional MMA fighter, which would have been fascinating. I just read that there are 650 million MMA fans around the globe. 650 million. You still have time to traverse here. I want you to know, Senator, you can still move on a parallel path.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is even the ones that are hated are still loved.
Yeah, right.
In politics, if you're hated, you're just hated.
You're just hated, pure hate. So by reading your background, it was almost a reluctant choice to get into serving where you are now, because there are so many other things that are important in your life, your family business. We'll talk about that in a second. But now you're here in D.C., and we see the President of the United States, who's had Nobel Peace Prize worthy adventures in the Middle East. Hopefully, we're going to see a breakthrough in Ukraine very, very soon. And yet what's occupying Americans right now, Senator, as you know, is pocketbook economics. There's just still a concern for a lot of Americans about how they're going to kind of get through, not just to next year, but even to tomorrow. What do you tell these Americans, especially the Oklahomans that you deal with back in your home base, to reassure them that as we're transforming government, we're doing it for a reason, and the reason is to create a more stable economic base for everybody?
That's a tough question because reality is perception. We just recently saw a poll today that people believe that gas is higher today than it was a year ago. That's not accurate, even close to being accurate, right? So the perception is that people believe that the groceries are higher. And Walmart CEO came out and said it was actually down over 20%. But those are small little things. People haven't seen these big changes because, we went from an inflation rate of 9.5%, 9.4% as a high underneath the Biden administration. Now we're hovering around 2.3, 2.4%. And that brings prices down. But the one big, beautiful bill, the OBBB, a lot of those policies, they won't go into effect until the 1st of January. So like no tax on tips. That goes into effect 1st of January. No tax on Social Security. If you have a high income, you're receiving Social Security, you're not going to see your taxes disappear. The tax cuts that we put in, the biggest tax cut we've seen in my lifetime was put in effect. You're going to see that on people's tax returns because those are retroactive to affect 2025. So when you file your taxes in 2026. So we feel like the first and second quarter people are going to see that, but we still have work to do. I mean, we still have high inflation. We have high pricing. Housing is still very tough, very difficult. We used to build a house for under $100 a square foot. Then it went to 100, then to 120. And high-end homes were around $160 a square foot. Now you're having entry homes at $300 a square foot for building where you can't afford to build it. You have to buy it, which means that it takes people away from the market. And so you have less building going on and more trading, house trading taking place, which doesn't open, the housing market, which puts a supply and demand, which causes problems. A lot of that can actually be fixed through regulation because we saw a tremendous amount of regulations that go in. And so when you start talking to people, this gets very complicated and you lose people because when you're explaining, you're losing. People's attention span is about 8 seconds. But I believe that as time goes on, before the president leaves the office and definitely before midterms happen, they're going to see the impacts of President Trump's economy by cutting regulation, cutting taxes, investing in America, bringing back manufacturing. But it just takes time. We haven't even been in charge a year. Remember, President Trump wasn't sworn in until January 20th. And so to see the mess that we cleaned up and see the progress that's already been made is pretty remarkable, but we have more work to do.
Well, Oklahoma obviously is a very big oil and gas state. And so national energy policy has become once again front and center. And there's the new term, of course, that's now in play across the nation, which is energy dominance. Are you bullish about where we're moving in terms of national energy policy? Because when you think about, Senator, things like the new AI data centers and all the energy is going to be required to run them to stay ahead in the AI global competition, which has all sorts of ramifications. Do you think we are on that right track to have the right blend of energy sources to approach, if not to be able to attain and keep energy dominance?
Well, you said it right by having a diverse energy, right? And people, when they talk about energy policy, they think about oil and gas. They don't think about all the above. So when you pivoted towards AI technology in these data centers, that's where the future is. The next war isn't going to be fought on the land as much as it's going to be fought in space. And the people that are able to process data the fastest will be able to have an advantage in the future. And so those data centers are very important. Who's got a head start on us is China, because China didn't buy into this green energy policy. China was bringing a coal-fired power plant online every 30 days, and they've been doing this for years. As we've been cutting down our energy supply. So we have to get out of our way, first of all, And then we have to realize that coal can be a clean energy. Natural gas was what was supposed to replace coal, and then it wasn't good enough for the environmentalists, and now they try to get away from all natural gas. We have the largest natural gas supplies in the world are located right here in the United States, and we could be powering that. We used to lead the world in nuclear. It took us 20 years before we got our last nuclear plant built, and it was tremendously overcost because of all the lawsuits on the environmentalists that were filing lawsuits against nuclear. But nuclear energy is the cleanest energy you can possibly generate. And some of these projects, it costs more for the permitting process than it does the project itself.
You're kidding me. Is that true?
Yeah, 100% true. 100% true. And if you can't ever get the project paid for, then the project isn't viable. So what brings a lot of these projects offline is they can factor in the cost of building the plant. They can even factor in the cost of building the infrastructure to get it to those that need the energy. What they have a hard time factoring in is the amount of lawsuits and how long it takes the permitting process to take place, which usually bankrupts the project to begin with. And so Chris Wright and Doug Burgum, because you got to remember, Chris Wright is energy, but a lot of our energy has to deal with interior as much as it does actually inside the Department of Energy. And then we got Lee Zeldin, who's working with the EPA, obviously the director of EPA, that's trying to get a comprehensive plan forward. But even Democrats, this is one thing that Democrats are working with in a bipartisan manner, is trying to get true permanent reform to build these infrastructures. My Lord, we still have rolling blackouts inside the United States. How are we going to bring in these huge data centers and think we're going to build supply energy to them?
Well, I remember when Chris Wright was on this show, when I asked him the question about what do we need, he basically said all of the above, right? Mm-hmm. We need everything in play right now for us to get to where we need to get to, because when you control energy, you kind of control your future. When you don't control that, others control you.
That's right. You control your destiny when you control your own energy. And what's interesting, we outsource our experts to other countries to build the projects that we can't build here inside the United States. So we teach them how to do things that we can't do anymore because of our permitting problems and the lawsuits from these environmentalist companies. And so we don't have to train people. We don't have to import people to teach us how to do it. We already know how to do it. We just got to take the gloves off.
So Charles Curtis, for those who love history, was the first Native American elected to the United States Senate, who later became Senate Majority Leader and Vice President. You then fast forward to Ben Nighthorse Campbell from Colorado and his service to that state and to the nation. Do you ever reflect back to people like that and looking for examples of how they dealt with issues of like tribal sovereignty in the interface between that and the federal government? Because I know you dealt with that a lot in Oklahoma. Did those examples or others help you as you navigate maybe at times, which is a gap in understanding in a lot of leaders in Washington about Native Americans, their needs, and how they can really help become even more a part of the American experience?
For me, I never knew I was special for being Indian until I came to Congress. And at that time, it was just Tom Cole and I. And Tom Cole said, congratulations, we just doubled the population, our Native American caucus. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, well, I'm Chickasaw and you're Cherokee.
Right.
I said, oh, we taught you how to read. And he says, and we took you guys as slaves. That was our conversation. But I didn't realize that there was anything special about it, because where I'm from, everybody's Indian or wants to be Indian. I guess, my decision making is I always grew up with it. And you don't realize that how much of it you know and understand, because everybody's dealing with the same issues. And then you get here in Washington, D.C., and you realize how much a disconnect it is. I hear people say this all the time. Why are we having to do this? I mean, these tribes are wealthy now. Why are we having to take care of their health care? Why do we take care of their infrastructure? Why do we pay for their schools? Like, well, it's part of a treaty that wasn't expired, that, by the way, was signed by Congress with no expiration date. And it's one of our federal obligations we have. It is still a federal obligation, regardless if I was Native American or if I wasn't Native American. We're only as good as our word. So when you start educating people on what's tribal sovereignty, what does that actually mean? What does sovereign nation inside of a nation actually mean?
Right.
It means that they're still able to have their leadership. It means that we're still able to vote on a chief. We're still able to have a government, but we also are overseen by federal. And that's what sovereignty is about self-governance, about being able to understand and maintain our history and watch over those that are within our nation. So I guess what I'm saying is that I've always dealt with it. I just didn't know I was dealing with it because still to this day, I live in Indian country. My kids were raised in Indian country. It's part of what we live and what we do every single day.
You, like the rest of us, have had to face up to a number of challenges. Now, when you were younger, at one point you had leg braces on, you overcame a speech impediment, and then you had a real challenge, which is with your dad. When he fell ill and suddenly at 20 years of age, you had to answer the call. And the call in this case was to take over and run the family business. How many times do you kind of draw on the strength of that experience of having overcome that challenge as you're moving through new challenges in your life today?
You did your research. I was born with my feet turned in and my hip out, and they had to break my feet, turn them in. I was never supposed to walk without a limb or play any type of sport, much less, become a professional athlete.
Wow.
And then I had a real bad speech impediment because I don't hear syllables. Mm-hmm. I remember in 6th grade when my speech pathologist finally told me what was going on, and she gave me a path of how I could fix it, because now I still mess up on pronouncing words. And people make fun of me all the time. I could care less. But if I don't know the word, I have to look at the way you place your tongue, because I had to learn how to speak that way. And so people that talk with their mouth like this, I just want to slap across the face because I can't see it. But it was the first time in my life that I realized I wasn't stupid. Throughout life, you just kind of look at things and you draw from different people in your life for challenges. For instance, my granddad, he was a combat engineer. He went over on Omaha Beach. They lost 63% of their guys, and he was in the Battle of Bastogne, and he never complained about being cold around him, ever. So anytime I was cold, I'd be like, it was never as cold as what my pawpaw was in. My dad, who moved out of his house when he was 17 and moved up to Kansas City, got married young. He had $20 in his pocket when he moved up there. He married a lady that he thought he was in love with, and she ended up leaving him with 4 young kids. And in the 70s, he got full custody of them and single, and moved from Kansas City back to Oklahoma and met my mom and started a business and had 3 more kids. And you just think of the challenges. I mean, I've heard his stories. My dad and I are very close. He had some serious challenges and serious struggles that he was going through at the time. And he was doing it alone. You think of, how bad he had it at that time. His thing about work is you never walk past a project that you can do yourself, and you never leave it for somebody else. And if you don't know how to do it, what makes you think the next guy knows how to do it? So figure it out. And he would tell you, figure it out. His words always to me, if I called him for help, he'd go, Markwayne, what would I do? Guarantee I'd figure it out. And that was after I paged him like 20 times, and he would hang up on me because, nobody had cell phones back then. And so when Dad called me and said he needed my help, I was at college on a full wrestling scholarship that I had worked 6 years for. I was in the starting position. Our team was going to win nationals that year. We were in a very good position, and my dad said he needed help, and I didn't hesitate. I went and told the coaches. I said, my dad asked me he needed my help. I'm leaving. And they threw the moon at me, man. They wanted me to stay. And then my wife, because I had moved out when I was pretty young too, my wife had an apartment, but she was my girlfriend and I didn't want to live with her. And so I was like, hey, babe, I got a great idea. I'm homeless. Let's get married. So she was crazy enough to say yes, and it's worked out 28 years. But I was confident that, we could make it happen. And so when we went to work, we did inherit some problems, but I never thought about giving up. I even had my brothers that had other companies at the time. They told me to file bankruptcy and walk away. I had other people, business leaders, tell me I should file bankruptcy and walk away. But
it's not your
my
nature.
dad needed me, and it entered my mind to quit. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I wasn't even a licensed plumber when I started business. I had to get my license. Yeah. I didn't know how to sign a checkbook. I never had a checkbook before. I had to figure all this stuff out, and I had just turned 20 years old. But I had a dad that I felt like truly, truly believed in me. And he put a foundation of never quit and instilled in me when I was very, very young. And I don't think I could have handled it without him, because it was a tough 3 years. I mean, tough.
When you talk about tough, what your wife and you went through with your son, he was seriously hurt on a wrestling mat in a life-threatening situation. And who crossed your path at that moment but Donald Trump? Yeah. And when people ask, well, why is Senator Markwayne Mullin so close to the president? It clearly began with something highly personal, where when all the chips are on the table, he showed up And I know you've talked about this. This is a side of the president maybe people don't understand nearly as well as they should. Tell me about that time with the president and what it means to you and your family, and what it really means, frankly, Senator, to the nation.
Well, the left has drawn this president that's a heartless individual that, doesn't care about anything but himself. But if that was true, he would have no relationship with his kids. He'd be just like the rest of the, a bunch of wealthy families that have no relationship with their kids, and their kids are spoiled brats, and his kids work hard and his grandchildren love him. And you see why, because he showed my son so much love and showed my family so much love in a very desperate need. When you have a son that literally almost died 3 times, they lost his pulse 3 times, he turned, blue in the lips. And then when he woke up, he was a different kid because he had severe oxygen depletion. He was out for 26 hours, and he was an elite athlete wrestling all over the world. And he gets up and he can't even touch his nose. He was doing trig in high school and he couldn't do 5+3. It was a tough situation. And the president found out about that. We were in the hospital, and the president called. And when he found out how serious it was, because I actually broke down with the president because he asked how Jim was doing. And I broke down. And at that time, we had a relationship, but not a relationship. We just had a working relationship. Mm-hmm. And immediately I said, we've got to go to Bakersfield, California, the Center for Neural Skills. They want him there in 24 hours. And he said, I'm sending my plane. It's like, sir, you can't send your plane. He says, yes, I'm sending my plane. He says, no, sir, we can't fly. We can't be at that high altitude. He says, what do you need? And he offered the world. I mean, he's president of the United States. He offered the world. And I said, sir, we're good. We're jumping in a motor coach. We're driving there. He called while I was driving. When we get there, he tried to pay for it. He tried to pay for everything. We're in rehab for 18 months, living out there in a motor coach, my son and I, while my wife was holding down the fort with the other 5 kids. Not only that, but this is in the middle of the 2020 election. He came to Bakersfield, California to see Jim. Of course, while he was there, he held a quick press conference. But there was a moment that his team kept wanting the president to leave. And he's saying they came to him on 2 or 3 different occasions and said, Mr. President, we got to go. We got to go. And he finally turned around to him and he says, hey, I guarantee you that plane won't leave without me. Yeah. Now, here's the president of the United States that isn't talking to me. He's got a huge reelection he's got to do. He's got to run the country, plus get reelected. And the most important person to him was my 14, 15-year-old son. And until then, Jim had short-term memory loss. So he wouldn't remember the day. And they always said that there's going to be an event that takes place. They'll just trigger it. And that first event he remembers, he'll get better and better every day. He remembers every single detail to this day about that event. And the president has always kept up with Jim, too. And my son got married a week ago Friday. And yesterday, I called one of his ledge staff. I was going to talk to him last night. It was about 8:30 last night. And the president picked up the phone immediately. The first thing he says is, hey, how's my boy's wedding? Because he knew knew he got married. And that was the first thing he said. He's like, he picked up the other guy's phone. And he said, he calls me country smart. And he says, how's my country smart senator doing? Now, how's my boy doing? How was his wedding? Oh. And I said, it was great, sir. And he goes, man, I should have been there. I should have been there. I should have got there. And I said, sir, that would have been pretty amazing. But man, what a mess that'd been if you would have showed up. And he says, these guys don't let me do anything. I can't just go do stuff like I used to do. I got stories after story after story about stuff like that. But my kids think that President Trump is their friend. I mean that sincerely. Like he knows them personally like that. And the president always makes time with them. If I come in the room and I got my kids with me, nothing to do with me. It's all about my kids. And that my kids have keys to the White House. They have books signed. They have hats signed. They've got his coins. Yeah. They've got personal letters that the president has wrote to them. My daughter the other day wrote a letter to the president and said, hey, can you just give this president? I didn't know what it said. I just put it in my pocket and I gave it to him the next time I saw him. And then when I went to the White House the next week, he had a return letter that he wanted me to give to her and said, tell her to write me anytime. Like, this is the president of the United States. Who does that? And the media doesn't cover any of that stuff. They just don't talk about that personal side of President Trump. And like my wife says, you show my kids some type of affection, you love on them, you care, you truly genuine care for them. I don't care what our relationship is. I will truly love you back.
I think what's really instructive is the president of the United States did not tell the media about that. This is not something he feels he needs to do in terms of leadership. But you've always impressed the American people, Senator, as someone who is real, authentic, and direct, not afraid to stand up, say what you believe, and to be willing to fight for it, for a cause that's bigger than yourself. And your story just now about your son and the president almost moved me to tears, frankly. I almost had to take a break here because I think we need more people like you in public service who are doing the nation's business.
Thank you. It's an honor, but anytime my kids and my wife want me to quit, I'm done. They all have veto power.
Well, everyone has their bosses. Those are yours, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Senator, great to be with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.
You too.